This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, French President Emmanuel Macron has won re-election while far-right candidate Marine Le Pen gained more votes than expected. How will the results shape the future of France and Europe in the next 5 years? Tesla billionaire Elon Musk has secured a takeover bid of Twitter. What's behind his decision and how could it change social media? Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. Emmanuel Macron became the first French president to win re-election in 20 years with a 17-point victory over the far-right populist Marine Le Pen. What do the election results tell us? How will Macron deal with the ongoing Ukraine crisis? And what can we expect for China-French ties and China-EU relations? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by Thierry de Montbreuil, founder and executive chairman of the French Institute for International Relations. Welcome to the show, Mr. Montbreuil. Well, as we have seen, President Macron has won the re-election with 17-point victory. So tell us, for the next 5 years, what will be his priorities and what will be his challenges?
Well, I think it is important to distinguish between domestic affairs and foreign policy. In domestic affairs, the problems are quite numerous and complex, but I will not go into these details because we are going to talk essentially about foreign affairs. Foreign policy, as you know, in France, the President of the Republic is fundamentally the decision maker. And I think that Macron will have majority, his government, after the legislative elections, his majority will be strong enough for him to have no difficulties, no challenge on foreign affairs. So that means that we can expect the foreign policy of France in the next 5 years to be essentially the continuation of what we have seen in the last few years. And in particular, the main long-term focus will be on the successful continuation of European construction, in particular because of the Ukrainian war, on its security dimensions.
We know that the U.S. has made it public that one of their goals in the Ukraine war is to weaken Russia. Do you think that purpose, that goal identifies with that of the European Union? And how, what role can President Macron play in that respect?
Well, we are now at a crossroads, concerning the Ukraine crisis. Well, first point, clearly, this was a Russian aggression. There is no doubt about it. On the Western side, some people, clearly in the United States particularly, would like to use this opportunity, if I can say so, to weaken, to put Russia on its knees. That is to weaken Russia so much that it's as a power, Russia's possibility would be essentially diminished, massively diminished, or eliminated in the next few years and decades. And here, of course, I personally am one of those who believe that we should be very cautious on this. And the objective should be to put an end to this illegitimate war in Ukraine, but the aim should certainly not be to eliminate Russia from the map, so to speak. And it seems to me that this is what President Macron has in mind, even if he would not say that as explicitly as I am trying to say today. But I think France does not want to put Russia on its knees. We want Russia to stop threatening its neighbors, and we want Russia to recognize that Ukraine is irreversibly an independent country.
President Macron proposed this idea, like a strategic autonomy, more autonomy for the European Union. Against a background of the ongoing war, what does that mean? Anything maybe added to this strategic autonomy, like less dependence on Russian oil and gas, or is there any thinking about less dependence even on the US?
Well, we have, of course, short-term and long-term considerations. In the short term, clearly issues such as energy relations with Russia and the restructuring of energy links, importing gas and oil from Russia, and all these things. All this will probably have to be reshuffled anyway, because even if it is not the West who impose more sanctions on Russia, it will be the Russians themselves who, as they just did in the last few days, will decide to interrupt their supplies of oil and gas to some European countries. So this is the short term. And in the short term, clearly there is nothing much that strategically that the Europeans can do without the United States. So if the question is about the coming weeks and possibly months, that is the time this war continues, there is no doubt that the relationship between the Europeans and the United States will remain what it is now. That is clearly the leading country is the United States. There is no doubt about it. Now, the project of strategic autonomy started before the war. It's not something new. And in fact, it was certainly very much stimulated by the presidency of Trump, because Trump was very close to withdraw from NATO, to withdraw the United States from NATO. And at some point, there could be Trump himself could come back, or another Trump could be elected in the United States. One cannot make a specific prediction on this. Therefore, it is very important for the Europeans to be more autonomous, meaning also to be more autonomous, more independent from the United States. But this will take some time, because we need to increase our military capacities, obviously, that is to spend more on defense. And this is a kind of revolution that now the Germans in particular are willing to do so, but it will take time. But also it will take a lot of time for the Europeans themselves to be able to agree, politically, on their common interest. Because defense, when you speak about defense, the problem is to defend against what? What are the key interests to be defended? So the key issue for the coming years, but you see here in the long-term perspective, will be to be more and more clear about what we mean by European interests.
Mr. Montbrial, if you look at China-France relationship for the next 5 years, Do you expect any changes in terms of like trade relationship, in terms of this strategic cooperation between France and China, between China and the EU?
Well, in fact, the relations more generally between China and Europe have been much impacted by the Trump years and the beginning of the Biden years. The change, it has become colder, if I can say so. I can tell you exactly when the whole turn took place. It was in the middle of the year 2020, that is 2 years ago, more or less. I think that the risk that we are facing today, we were talking about the United States, the risk is that clearly the United States would like to NATO, for instance, an alliance like NATO, to be gradually to become focused against China. Not only Russia, but China. Well, I think that many of us in Europe would not like that, certainly not the French, certainly not the Germans. So the British, it's another story. The British, I leave it to you and to discuss that with your British guests. But I think this is something we would dislike. And therefore, I think that the relations between particularly France and China will be good enough and warm enough to help us avoid this kind of evolution.
You mentioned the NATO. Estenberg, the NATO Secretary General, talked about shifting focus on Asia, on China. So how far do you think NATO will go in terms of serving the US purpose to contain China, for example?
This is exactly the point I raised. I think the French people, at least those who have some authority on intellectual or governmental authority on security affairs, we know and we think that the Atlantic Alliance, as its name suggests, should be concentrated on European security or the common interest between the United States and America on European security. And I think that most of us, talking about the experts or the people, I repeat, who have some authority on this subject, recognize that we have never been threatened by China. So there is absolutely no reason to transform the Atlantic Alliance into anti-Chinese alliance. We have not been threatened. We are not threatened by China. And also, if we look at the competition between China and the United States, as long as it is a fair competition, we just observe it, but we have no reason, the Europeans, we have no reasons to side by the United States to counter the development of China. So this is not our interest. And in that sense, we are very much like many other countries in the world who do not want to be forced to choose between the United States and China. We want to develop good relations, trade, economic relations. We want to be able to work with you on fundamental matters like climate change and all pandemics and health issues. There are many fundamental subjects we would like to be able to continue to work in the most constructive way.
Well, thank you, Mr. Montbrial. Thank you for your time and insight.
Thank you very much.
Let's move to the Twitter deal. Calling himself a free speech absolutist, Elon Musk has clinched a deal to acquire Twitter for $44 billion in cash. Why did the world's richest person feel it necessary to make the purchase? And could he make Twitter the de facto public town square as he wishes? To find out, I'm joined by Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics and Anthony Chan, former JP Morgan Chase chief economist. Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome to the show. I will start with Anthony. What do you make of the deal? $44 billion in cash for Twitter. Is that a good purchase?
I think that for Mr. Elon Musk, it is a good purchase. He has a real strong interest in controlling that freedom of speech that he talks about. And he also tells us that he's not really all that concerned about the economics of the deal, that it's something that is important to him to have control and provide less content moderation than they had before. So to the extent that these are his goals, it is a good deal for him.
Yeah, so it's not about the numbers, it's really about the value right here.
That's correct. The best example of that is that he basically waived his rights to actually go through the numbers carefully and have his financial advisors look through those numbers before making a decision. He went ahead and made the offer, which he called best and final, without actually looking at the numbers very carefully, which other people with a price tag this high would have done so very carefully and meticulously.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, since the deal is done, do you think this will also prompt some other, let's say, activist investors to have a stake in Twitter?
Yeah, well, I think it's a good thing for Twitter investors. He has already said that he doesn't really care about the money. He's a very rich guy. His personal wealth is very close to make him the human being's first trillionaire. So, $44 billion is not a big number for him. And that's a huge premium over the Twitter market value just a few days ago. So the investors are all very happy about this, I would say. Otherwise, the board wouldn't have accepted his offer. But he also explicitly said this deal is not so much about money, about investment. He probably doesn't, $44 billion to him is a significant number, but it's not so much of a significant number. I think what he's mostly coming from is the perspective that a big tech company needs a voice. I think the precedent for him is Jeff Bezos, the CEO and owner of Amazon.com, who owns Washington Post. I think he probably sees from Jeff Bezos' experience that owning a major media outlet is something quite important for a big tech company, and it's also something that can potentially be financially viable as well. So I think that's what's probably coming from.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anthony, what do you make of Musk's objective to make Twitter the de facto public town square?
Well, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that everybody defines what they mean by free speech and, of course, what a town square is. There's no secret that Mr. Musk is not leaning to the left, but rather leaning to the right, a little bit more conservative. So those voices may, in fact, get a little bit more visibility. The proof of that is that when you look at the number of Twitter users recently on the political front, Democrats were losing Twitter users and Republicans were gaining Twitter users. So that would tell me that you'll be getting a much more attention and perhaps more visibility for conservative voices. The fact that Mr. Musk has strong economic ties with China may be an opportunity for China to be heard in a more fair manner compared to before, where a lot of the users were more left-wing and perhaps less friendly in the wake of his business ties. So this is just some of the things that people are speculating. We do not know if these things will happen, but logically, these are things people are thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, it seems to me there is a clear party line. You see the Democrats are, raising the alarm, while the conservatives or Republicans celebrate. And globally, other countries would say, you know what? As Musk points out, probably the conservatives and the liberals probably equally upset him. So yeah, there are some opinions, there are some remarks probably you don't like, you don't agree with, but that's the freedom of speech, right?
Uh, Everybody agrees that freedom of speech is very important, but I think at a very fundamental level, the function of these big platforms, what really are they? Are they publishers, or they enjoy some kind of a common, carrier kind of a status that basically it's a platform, it's content neutral, it doesn't have this moderation role when it comes to the content and opinions. My take on this is that these things are never sort of the common carrier status. I mean, it's always moving towards a publisher kind of a status. It's probably somewhere in between. Even though he openly says that he's not very happy with the moderation process, but in reality and in practice, I think the idea that the platform can entirely stay out of this and let whatever speech people say to be accessible to the public is just not a very realistic idea. I mean, the First Amendment right has limits. You can't have hate speech, you can't have this kind of a speech, you can't have racial discrimination, for example. All these things need kind of a moderation role here, no matter the exact meaning of that and the boundary of that really entails. But at the end of the day, the platform is going to be responsible for this content, in my view. So I think he may come into this with a very idealistic vision, especially in the context that he's very happy that his own speech is somehow sort of censored or being very much monitored by the platform that he's buying into. But eventually, I think he's going to realize that his idealistic view, his idealistic world, just is not very viable in today's environment. So he might change, and he understands that this is his own company. And honestly, I don't think that Twitter's future is going to be any different, say, from the future what's happening with with Washington Post at this point. There used to be a very right-leaning media, but now it's becoming quite left-leaning. I think eventually Twitter is going to reflect his own position. I mean, he's the big boss here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anthony here, I'm right of the freedom of speech, but at the same time, obviously there's a need. I think we all agree with that is like you don't promote hate speech, you don't promote those kind of speech that will hurt a particular group of people. I think probably people have little problem with that. It's really about whether you are conservative or you are the liberal, on the left, on the right. Sometimes they don't like each other. They would say that kind of speech we should somehow limit. So I'm trying to figure out, what's his true idea in terms of unbridled freedom of speech here.
Well, I think it's very clear that most people, when they talk about freedom of speech, whether it be somebody from the left or the right, they define freedom of speech based on their ideals. And so somebody that's a left wing that talks about freedom of speech is probably supporting their viewpoint, and somebody from the right will be supporting their viewpoint. The big question is whether this big town square will sort of be neutral and not take both sides and try to promote their own. I guess the best example of this is that Elon Musk has said himself that he would be very excited if his biggest enemies would stay on the platform because he wants to promote that free speech. But you saw that in the last presidential election when the President-elect Biden, or now President of the United States, said he wanted to unite everyone. But we're still struggling with polarization in the United States. And so uniting both camps in a world of extreme politicization is very challenging. And I agree with Professor Gong. It is a great goal, but it's going to be very difficult to accomplish this in practical terms.
Mm-hmm. So, John, it seems to me like it's really about political speeches, the ideas, the values being on the left, on the right. For example, like former President Donald Trump, right? And so people are wondering, curious, whether Trump will come back to Twitter. He said publicly he will not come to here because he has his own, truth social, right? And actually, Musk pointed one reason probably he listed, for his purchase of Twitter is like, okay, Truth Social is ahead of Twitter in terms of the ranking.
I think there's a real possibility that President Trump may be coming back after this takeover, actually. The thing is that we all know free speech has boundaries, but the problem is that the boundaries are really in the eyes of the beholder. The left and right, they have their own interpretation of what that boundary is. So still, again, this is very much a political issue, and being the owners of such a large platform, such an influential platform, certainly has some influence over the exact definition of that boundary. And I think, at the very least, I wouldn't characterize Mr. Musk as sort of really to the right. I think he's probably center right, and I think it's okay. I think by and large the high tech media is probably more leaning to the left, and you have such another big platform that's a little bit leaning to the right. I think it's quite acceptable, and we need a diversity of opinions and voices in society. So I think overall, this is still a very good development, and I think one thing I do want to caution, though, is that if you look at the history of this man's track record in terms of his management style, in terms of he run things, I would say, he is quite authoritarian. Let me use that word very cautiously. He has this kind of a work style. He's very, strongly opinionated, and he is very persistent, and in some sense is very stubborn. In a sense, he does things that he wants to do, and most of the time he did get things done in his own way. So we don't want to see this kind of a style be carried into such an important public platform. It's entirely different. Even though it's a private company, but Twitter and Facebook, they do have a public function characteristics, and you be very careful about running a company like this with its old style of management.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anthony, the White House press secretary Jen Psaki said that President Biden is concerned about the power of the large social media platform. What do you make of his remarks over there?
Well, those remarks from the White House, to me, don't have as much importance, because you heard that from people in the White House that were more conservative. Under the prior administration, President Trump had the same concern, and now Biden is expressing that concern. So at the end of the day, both the left and the right will complain when they feel that their views are not being expressed as they want them to be expressed. So to me, that's actually healthy when I hear conservatives complaining about these social media platforms, and I hear liberals or Democrats complaining about the social media. It must mean that they're doing a better job than we think. So to me, I find that very encouraging. I would be more disturbed if it was only one side of the political aisle complaining about whether these social media platforms are being fair or not fair. But right now we have both sides of the political aisle complaining.
That's right. We will figure out as the things develop. Thank you, Anthony and John. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.